This is my video about the fact that the Pokemon situation is not a big deal. So what's been going on with the Pokemon situation right now? If you're out of the know, you have to know that the Pokemon prices are going up for almost all of the cards. A card like Umbreon VMAX here, a card from several sets ago, has ended up costing almost $1,500 for a single copy with this artwork alone. But it's not just the nice cards that have ended up increasing in price over the past few months. Almost all of the packs that have been released either in the past couple of years or have been released recently have been increasing in price substantially. A recent pack to come out, like this Scarlet and Violet 151, ended up costing about $30 off of the secondary market, when in comparison to the regular price of these packs would run you between $10 and $15 regularly. And you may be looking at this from the outside and wondering, why are all of the prices of all the Pokemon cards going up by so much? I think the answer is relatively obvious, and it's the new addition of the mobile app Pokemontcg Pocket. This is a somewhat of a remake or reimagining of the Pokemon trading card game, but for a only mobile version that is completely divorced from the Pokemon TCG online framework. In this new mobile version of Pokemon TCG, you can open one pack every day with a certain amount of restrictions for completely free, and the pack opening experience is much more exciting and powerful to a player than it would be in the previous TCG version. This helps make it enticing for new players who don't normally play Pokemon trading card game but want to get into the game or look into what this new cool version of Pokemon playing is. They have also heavily simplified the game down for many new players, as that is clearly the core audience that this game is aiming towards. A card like Charizard EX here has a very low amount of HP and low amount of damage compared to the traditional cards from the regular card game. This has made it so a lot of people who open Pokemon cards in their youth are coming back and seeing this card game and making them want to go back to that feeling of opening new cards in the real world as they are in the virtual world here with this new Pokemon TCG Pocket. And this has led to people absolutely freaking out over Pokemon cards. If we look at the Costco price for this Pokemon Scarlet and Violet Blooming Waters edition, it only costs about $45. However, if you look at the resale price for it online, it's for almost triple that much, selling online to people on eBay. This large price disparity between the selling price from big box stores like Costco to the resale price that people can get it for selling online has led to a lot of the situations that end up a bit like this. Scalpers running in, rushing into stores trying to get as many copies of the can, as each one is individually worth about an extra $100 in your pocket if you can only get your hands on them from the Costco directly. These scalpers ended up being enabled or flanked by gamblers or investors, which are buying these Pokemon packs at the inflated prices, say, for example, $40 for a single booster pack, for two hopes. Either they hope that they can hold on to the pack for a long time and that it'll increase in value, basically serving as an investment that you never wish to actually play with, or they will simply crack the pack in the hopes of hitting that 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 chance of a super duper expensive card coming out of a pack that they paid much less for. This doesn't really leave a lot of room for the people who actually like Pokemon and want to play the card game. So you may be wondering, at the end of all of this, with the scalpers, the investors, the people cracking tons of packs, what actually ends up happening to affect the game of Pokemon as a whole. The real answer, in my opinion, is that it doesn't really affect the card game playing actually almost at all. On my video talking about ways that card game could die, I got many comments coming from people talking about the Pokemon section, saying that people aren't able to get access to the cards to play the game, that set releases are fought for by people way too much, and the scalpers are ruining the game. And while I agree that scalpers definitely suck, especially for casual collectors who just want to get a single or maybe a playset of cards that they really like, looking at all of the prices for the top decks in the metagame really shows a different story for Pokemon. Regidrago, the best deck in the metagame right now, cost $80. Charizard and Pidgeot, $75. Raging Bolt Ogerpon, $77. These decks are all much cheaper than the packs or the actual cards that I showed in the previous slides. And these prices are laughable when you compare them to the best decks from the other constant competing card games on the market right now in Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! These two card games and have decks that are playable for the metagame that cost $500, $600. It has been very common that these card games can have decks that run up to almost $1,000 to simply end up playing them, which is ridiculous when you compare it to Pokemon's relatively affordable decks. This is why I think it's extremely important to analyze why cards have high price tags, as almost all cards will generally have a reason behind the fact that they have a very high price tag. For Umbreon, it ends up being pretty straightforward. Umbreon looks really nice. It's a full art card. It has a lot of nostalgia behind it, as Umbreon is a very early game Pokemon coming from the second generation. A lot of people want it simply for the way it looks. But there are also many other reasons that cards can have a large price tag. And I am generally in these examples going to be skipping over rarity, as rarity is usually involved in almost the price of any single card. If a card is more rare, it'll cost more, almost 1-to-1. The obvious one that comes to most heavy card game players' mind is how strong a card ends up being will help determine how high the price tag is. The card from Yu-Gi-Oh! Here, Fiend Smith Engraver, has many powerful abilities and is seeing a lot of play in the standard metagame right now, and as a result is ending up costing around $100 for a copy. Another large contributor to price is also how old the card is, harder to get a hold of. A card like Underground Seeker, commonly played in legacy decks in Magic the Gathering, will run you about $700 or $800 to get a copy. These both cause two problems for players that are often hard hurdles to overcome if you want to make a card game affordable and playable by many people. If your deck requires really old cards, it is really hard to get into these formats due to the scarcity. It is simply hard to get your hands on old cards because there are a lot less of them going around, making their price really high and making it really hard for you to get new copies. For standard formats, the problem with cards like Fiend Smith Engraver tend to be due to the rarity. It is hard to get your hands on several copies of these cards, as you need to put them in your deck to be able to play the standard format. However, due to the high rarity and the high price tag, it is hard to put your deck together with all cards like this because of the fact that there are not very many printed, and you have to crack new packs to end up getting additional copies if you can't find them anywhere on the market. And whilst these reasons do suck and definitely detract new players from the game, they make a lot of sense from a game design point. The companies simply need a reason for you to want to buy standard packs outside of the fact that they make new cards that you may want to play with. If Kaito, for example, was an uncommon or a common in the new set, a lot less people would end up opening the set looking for that specific card. On the topic of older cards, they often retain their value because they are really old and cannot meaningfully be changed by the people who actually make the game. A first edition Charizard cannot be reprinted, as the whole point of the rarity and the fact that it costs a lot is because it came from the first edition, meaning that the developers can't really use these cards in any way to add any money to the company's pockets. This somewhat naturally leads to overpriced standard formats coming out, as the companies want you to be able to buy standard packs with expensive cards in them in a search for those pricey cards, making a profit for the company. But this also harms the new player experience, as seeing a standard that costs $500, $600 can make it really hard to get into a game. So what are these companies supposed to do if you need to have a really expensive standard metagame in order to have people play, but you don't want the format to be really expensive so that way new players will come into your game? And the answer that most of these card game developers have run into is that they should divorce the price of a card and its playability in your standard metagame. The price of first edition versions is already somewhat handled by this. If you have, for example, a first edition Blue Eyes White Dragon, it'll run you for about $75 right now. But if you want to play with Blue Eyes White Dragon in the standard format right now, you only have to pay about $2 to get a copy of it because of the fact that the old one is the only one that's worth a lot. Any new reprints that have been made are going to cost substantially less than the original version. Okay, but what if your card game doesn't have an eternal format where you can play with the old cards that are really expensive and you can reprint them over and over? Well, Magic has solved this example in their standard format by having alternative art versions of cards. A standard playable card like Elishnorn Mother of Machines here will run you a pretty hefty price as a relatively playable mythic at $22. But if you want to get a more expensive version to help bling out your deck, for example, you can go for the alternate art version of Elishnorn, which will cost you about $150, as its rarity and its nice artwork are much higher than the other card. This is an absolute dream way of doing these things for Pokemon. This easily lets them balance both playability and rarity at the same time in their card game. This lets Pokemon print really nice looking cards to help target their collector demographic, like this Gengar VMAX here. It lets them print really rare and strong cards for its competitive player aspect, like the A-Spec cards such as Prime Catcher, and it lets them do both at the exact same time by printing really good standard cards that also have really nice artworks, being able to appeal to both collectors and competitive players at the same time. This works out really great for both the Pokemon Company and the players who actually end up wanting to play with the cards that they open. This is a way to let players spend as much money as they want on the game, meaning that they can play for very cheap or very expensive. If you wanted a cheap option of a standard playable card like this Iono here, you can just get the basic version for probably what is less than a few dollars. But if you wanted to bling your deck out and make your deck look really nice and cool, perhaps you're building up your collection, you can pay a lot more for the expensive full art version of the card with functionally the same effect. This also helps because there is a massive range in price between the cards. There's a massive middle area of foils and different versions of cards that can be filled in by the Pokemon Company if you want to spend a bit of extra money on your cards, but don't want to go all the way spending $1,000 on a nice card. Now, I haven't addressed scalpers much in this video, but that is because, in my opinion, scalpers will simply be addressed by both the natural passage of time and the Pokemon Company themselves. Usually, the life of a scalper ends up going a little something like this. There's a surprising number of people who start buying more and more packs, driving up the price naturally as the demand increases. This naturally causes a lot of scalpers to flood in, trying to make profit off of the market as the price of everything goes up and they want to get in for cheap. The Pokemon Company, seeing that there's many people paying much more for the products that they have, increases the amount of product, seeing that they could get a lot of more value out of it if they release a large amount of product to many, many players. This naturally leads to prices dropping as the amount of cards that people want is getting fulfilled over time, meaning that there will be many, many more cards, and all the cards that had a really, really high price drop in price in the hands of both scalpers and people who really, really wanted the cards in that exact moment. The only exception to this rule where the prices don't naturally drop down after a large spike is when there are cards that simply cannot be reprinted in any meaningful way in order to drop the price and give that money back to the company that made the cards in the first place. A first printing version of a Charizard or a Black Lotus from the original printing of Magic the Gathering sets are cards that cannot be reprinted in any meaningful way, giving any money back to the company. If you see scalpers or investors focusing on these kind of cards, this is why. There is no meaningful way for them to lose out on their investment, as the company simply has no way of getting the value back out of these cards. And I think that's okay. A high price is what a lot of players want when they actually end up playing cards and opening card packs. Seeing a beautiful Umbreon VMAX with a massive price tag really makes players get drawn into playing the card game. They want to see that awesome card. They want to get that large payout, and they want to open packs to see if they can be the one to get the Umbreon VMAX. Pokemon certainly isn't the first or only game to do this. Magic the Gathering, first I remember, started with these expedition cards, absolutely beautiful lands, playable in multiple formats, that cost a very large amount of money, not to be left out, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Also has very high rarity cards, foil editions, super rare editions that cost a very, very high amount of money. All of these things help sell packs, which is the end of the day, the only thing that the company that is running really needs to happen to keep the card game going. As long as you can find some way to sell packs to players and make it an enjoyable experience, I don't think it really matters what happens to get to that result. At the end of the day, there are a lot of people who want really high priced cards so they can chase that dream of opening that lottery ticket in their pack of cards. There's a lot of people who want low price cards so they can play the game for as cheap as possible and get that enjoyment out of the game without having to break the bank. All I really end up caring about at the end of the day, though, is that there are good options for all kinds of players. And if you end up just looking at the numbers, we have Magic that's currently costing about $500, we have Yu-Gi-Oh! Costing about $600, and Pokemon, which costs about $80. The math simply doesn't add up, and Pokemon vastly outperforms these other two games in terms of price and playability. Card game design is a tough balancing act, balancing between investors who want cards that cost a really high amount, the new players who want cards to be as cheap as possible, and everyone in between. And if we look at all of these games, I think Pokemon has done a fantastic job balancing their high price and low priced options. And that's the video. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this one coming from this channel. Let me know about other card game prices in the comments. I know that there are many indie card games that can do wild things with their prices to see what sticks. I also plan on doing some streaming soon, so let me know if you want to see streams here on YouTube or if you would rather me co-stream them onto Twitch. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.